And we now move straight into our first panel. And as we heard just there, AM is definitely on the move. And to maintain and boost the industrialization dynamic, it is crucial that we define clear priorities, which is why we're devoting this session to assessing where we stand and looking at how the pandemic has influenced the industrialization of AM, highlighting exciting cases and applications, and identifying challenges that we need to focus on going forward. So I'm going to ask our participants to please join me on stage as I read off their names. All of them are key AMTC partners about whom much could be said, but I'm going to keep the introductions brief in the interest of maximizing our discussion time. Dr. Roland Fischer is CEO of the Oerlikon Group. Roland, great to see you again. Welcome. And you may take that seat right there if you would. Markus Simon is Vice President Additive Manufacturing at Siemens Energy and Materials Solutions. Welcome. Great to see you. Right next to Roland, please. Markus Simon is leader of McKinsey's Advanced Electronics Practice and co-leader of its industrial automation work in Africa, Europe, and the Middle East. Welcome. Francisco Betti is head of advanced manufacturing and production at the World Economic Forum, the WEF. Hi, wonderful to see you again. Please, over here. Thank you. Cindy Ko is Executive Vice President of Singapore's Economic Development Board, overseeing its international operations. Big welcome to you, Cindy Ko. And it's great to have with us Jörg Spindler. He's Head of Manufacturing Engineering at Audi AG. Welcome to you. Nice to see you again. Ladies and gentlemen, to give our speakers some additional input, I want to sample the wisdom of the crowd, your wisdom. We're going to be using the digital tool on our online platform, so please follow the instructions you see, hopefully very soon, on our big screens to log in and then to go onto our live stream and vote. And if you would be so kind, please just hold up your mobile or tablet so that I'll know you're ready. If you've got a laptop, you don't have to hold it up. But the others, if you would, just give me a quick indication that you're ready, and then we're going to do our first audience poll. Very good. I'm only seeing a couple. I'm just going to give you a little time to go online, go to our platform, and then you'll see on the streaming window polls. Was that a question? Oh, okay. Well, some of you are already voting, so let's just go straight to our first question, and this is our test question, of course. When did you last board an airplane to go on vacation? Obviously, once again, getting at the fact that COVID has changed our lives. Interestingly enough, it looks pretty evenly divided here. But definitely a good quarter of you more than a quarter of you have boarded an airplane this year to go on vacation, but 2020, looking a lot lower than probably otherwise would have been, judging from the fact that 30% say they boarded a plane in 2019. So, very good. Let us now go on to our first serious poll, and it is this. It goes to the subject that we're going to be addressing now, straight away. How would you rate our progress on AM industrialization since the pandemic began in late 2019? And the answer choices are good to excellent, satisfactory, no progress, or overrated. Can we open up that poll, dear techno? Yeah, there we go. I appreciate that it's hard to read on these little screens we have, but you can actually see it better, dear panel if you look here at the big screen above your heads. Okay, that result is starting to stabilize, and it's interesting because we did have 68% of you saying satisfactory, and just around 8% was my last reading. Yeah, good to excellent. So perhaps a little bit less upbeat than the panel that we heard just a moment ago. I'd like to now get our panelists' take, and I will begin by just going straight across the panel, if I may, and ask whether you would agree with the dominant opinion that essentially was telling us it's satisfactory, but it could be better. The glass is, I would say, half full, but also half empty. Roland Fischer, what do you think? Would you say, as a service provider who definitely knows both sides of the AM market, the hardware and software manufacturers as well as the end users, would you say that assessment is about right, or are you more upbeat?
I think in general, the assessment is right. I would be a little bit more optimistic, more on the positive side. Of course, there have been a lot of impacts. You know, prototype business went down, aerospace was down. But on the other hand side, there are great examples, and they have been mentioned: space, defense, oil and gas, which are quite promising. And from that perspective, I'm a little bit more optimistic.
Thank you very much. And just say a word, if you would, about how you at Oerlikon see developments in the market over the course of the pandemic.
No, as I indicated, I think the markets are moving. Yes, there is not a huge rush everywhere. It's more selective, but in individual applications, industries, verticals, there is a huge momentum. Unfortunately, we cannot talk too much about it because clients are quite sensitive, but it works.
Okay, very good. Then let me now go straight down the panel. Markus Simon, how do you see it? Would you be with the audience there in terms of the more horizontal, or would you be there?
I guess I'm a bit more with Roland Fischer. I think the pandemic, of course, has, and we've seen the question also in terms of aerospace, the pandemic has impacted our lives, yes, but I also see, reflecting a bit both from a user as Siemens Energy, but also through our material solutions business, there have been new opportunities emerging that we didn't have so much on our radar. And I guess overall, the progress that we've made as a user in terms of adopting the technology has significantly taken a step ahead over the past year. And to some extent, the pandemic even has put additional catalyst into some applications, such as spare parts management, such as inventory management. So I think I'm a bit more upbeat from our own perspective than the 68%, whereas I'm surprised that it was still 68% satisfactory. I would have expected that to be actually lower when you do an audience poll.
Okay. Markus Simon, McKinsey certainly does have an overview of the market and the industry as a whole. What's your take?
Yeah, I would tend to agree to the overall rating of the group here, but it depends a bit on where you are focused on. So we have seen tremendous movements and tremendous speed, especially in the space of taking this as an opportunity as a user. So quite a lot of companies really tend to apply additive manufacturing in the production field, especially in the spare parts field, in the very small lot sizes. So there we see quite a lot of movements, a lot of also questions in our direction. Where could we use it? How could we speed it up? I would say if you are rather a manufacturer, it depends a bit what are you focused on. Yeah, on the plastic side, we see a lot of momentum. On the metal side, it's a little bit different. Aviation was definitely under pressure. On the other side, you're fully right. If you're a space and defense market supplier, then probably you're on the better side of the game. For me, it depends a bit on where are you focused on. Now, if you have a rather broad portfolio as a supplier, I would tend to agree that probably it was a satisfying situation still in COVID. If you're more on the edgy side, rather into certain verticals which were under pressure, then the picture might be really, really different.
Francisco Betti?
I could say that I could tend to agree with the rating from the audience. What I could say is that what COVID-19 did is she put additive manufacturing on top of the news, on top of the global agenda. Think about how the additive companies, OEMs, came together to make nasal swabs, PPE, or even to come in support of those companies who were needing, spare parts and components to replace their equipment. So COVID-19 created a lot of positive momentum for additive, right? And people, the general public, got more aware of what additive can do and deliver. However, we are still far away from that industrialization and deployment at industrial scale that we are looking for. I was checking some stats yesterday evening, and the total number of units that were delivered in 2020 was 2 million compared to 1.4 million in 2018. So still far away from that 30 million that we're aiming for by the end of the decade. So I could say that the main challenge for the additive community today is how do we leverage the momentum that the pandemic generated to be able to capitalize it and move towards industrialization. That's for me the key challenge ahead. But I remain positive.
Thank you very much. And Cindy Ko, your take, especially from a perspective of Asia. It's been mentioned several times that Asia has big aspirations in terms of AM and also quite a developing ecosystem with several regions aspiring to be real AM hubs. So perhaps you can tell us whether you think industrialization is more advanced in your region.
Perhaps I will talk about what happened during pandemic. I think with the COVID-19, you've seen the slowdown in innovation, and it's not specific to additive manufacturing. I think it's across the board. What we are seeing in Singapore is there is no slowing down in the investment in innovation, especially in additive manufacturing. So my friend here from the WEF, he spoke about, in times of national emergencies, Singapore actually worked with a local startup and with Tusud, actually in developing a new design of the nasal swab, right, and getting it qualified within 59 days. We were told by Tusud that in normal times that would have taken 2 years. And we printed 5 million of these swabs within 3 months. So you think about the speed to market, right, within with a new design within 5 months. That's incredible. And I agree. Then the question is, the need to look at the underlying, factors that enable that speed to market. And the question is whether it can be applied to the other sectors, the other end users, and on a more sustainable basis. Now, going back to then Asia and Southeast Asia, I would say that, if you look at pre-pandemic, Asia was probably the second largest global additive manufacturing market after the US, slightly ahead of Europe. And Southeast Asia is actually becoming a bright spot for innovation adoption. Now, you look at the global manufacturing output, Southeast Asia contributes about 5% of the global manufacturing output. I think ThyssenKrupp actually projected that this region, if they adopt additive manufacturing usage, the manufacturing value add coming up from Southeast Asia could grow to about 86 billion euro dollars. That is significant market opportunity. Now, if you look at then, the adoption of additive manufacturing was primarily driven in applications in aerospace as well as automotive. And both industries are now going through significant changes. And what we've seen in Singapore, because we have a very diverse manufacturing ecosystem, actually seeing additive manufacturing being adopted in other sectors. So I mentioned about the nasal swab is one example. We've been very strong in marine and offshore. So just last month, Keppel, which is one of our shipyards, actually announced a DNV certification of the world's largest 3D printed ship floor mounting or lifting. And that was just announced last month. That project actually just started in June 2020 in the midst of lockdown. So Keppel actually worked with Tusud, and with that project itself actually comprised about more than 30 parts across different manufacturers in Singapore. Right. So I spoke about there's no letdown, there's no stepping off the pedal in investing in developing capabilities, and the market opportunity that's coming out from Southeast Asia beyond applications in aerospace and automotive.
Very interesting. Thanks very much. And Jörg Spindler, the automotive point of view, are you with the audience saying satisfactory, but not quite as exciting as it could be?
Well, I agree with the result of the auditorium. Yes, that's right, but not with the question itself. We had no impact because of the pandemic situation for the additive manufacturing projects we had inside our company. We had the possibility to do our workshops and everything with distances between the staff, so we could work on like the years before. But the speed we have to accelerate in the future is not as fast as it should be or it could be. So no influence of the pandemic situation, but I'm not really satisfied in total. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to dig a little deeper with a second audience poll and a second round of questions on challenges. But before I do that, I just want to tell the audience, we're also eager to hear your questions to our panelists. So you can use the same digital tool that you just used for voting also to pose questions. You'll see a questions tab, go there, and you can write your own question, or you can like other people's questions. And we definitely do want to take those questions as well as questions from those here with us in person in the hall. You can pose your questions the old school way as well after we do our next round here in response to our second audience poll. So let's now go to that second poll, and it essentially, as I said, gets to the issue of impediments to momentum. What is slowing down the industrialization of AM either now or potentially in future? And our question is, where are solutions most urgently needed to accelerate AM industrialization in the next 2 years? And dear audience, you have the choices: legal uncertainty, insufficient political support, lack of business models, gaps in norms and standards, or unreliable technology. I'm going to give you a little bit of time to vote. Okay, so at the moment, can we get the result back just for a moment? Can we just see the end result? 43% said production costs were an issue, and 21% unreliable technology, followed by norms and standards, 14%, lack of business models, 19%. And very few seem to believe that legal uncertainty or insufficient political support is a main impediment. So, Roland, let me start with you and ask you to address whatever strikes you as particularly important among those challenges.
Actually, I'm not very surprised. I think we have entered the phase of industrialization, and there are plenty of proof points. And now it's about efficiency. Now it's about creating customer value here, and that boils down to the sheer challenge of reducing the costs here. And from that perspective, the poll exactly reflects how I see it. Right?
May I just ask you for Oerlikon, as a company immensely knowledgeable in metals, metal powder, we heard at the end of our last session from Jochen Eickholt that we need also more advanced material solutions. Would you agree with that? And are there challenges there that you think need to be addressed, are being addressed? How do you see it?
No, I agree. I think I do see a certain priority in the ranking. It's right now the efficiency, the cost topic, and if you enter a site producing parts, you see this is far beyond what an industrialized company should look like. And from that perspective, it's material handling, it's parts flow. I think this is the topic which is the most important and urgent one to be worked on. In parallel, the age of new materials is coming. It's just a matter of time. Right now, the focus is still on the production side to produce the quality which is required to create, the service, a combination with post-processing. But you're absolutely right. Material, this is the second important question.
Thank you very much. Markus Simon, how do you see it amongst that list of impediments? Which ones would you rate, or would you agree with the audience, or which ones would you rate as top challenges?
I guess it depends a bit. There's two different timescales. If I observe over the past years the themes at additive conferences and events, it was a few years back, it was still predominantly about the technology itself. It was about a new printer, it was about a new material, and it was about solving a technology challenge still. The theme at this conference and today is clearly about applications and how you can actually scale up volumes. So it's not so much a question anymore, can additive manufacturing actually make a difference? It's where does it make a difference and how fast can you scale? So I guess the whole discussion has shifted. And so I guess we have a short-term challenge, which is, and I reflect now a bit from my own experience in Siemens Energy, there is not a question anymore whether or not we can put 3D printed components on our, for instance, gas turbines. The questions we are getting is, can you produce this part in thousands on a repeatable way, and can I trust this technology today? Because once I take a design decision to go additive, there's no way back. And if you then can reliably produce it, then you have a bigger problem than just the technology not working. So I guess that's the question number one, reliable production for me. And that has to do with the technology, yes. It also has to do with stable supply chains, and it also has to do with a clear understanding of the overall cost model for additive. Can you then also produce parts at certain costs? So that's a short-term challenge, industrialization. But then midterm, we need to continue to also push the boundaries of the technology, because we need to unlock new application spaces. And for this, you need new materials, you need eventually bigger printers, you need more productive printers, because this would unlock new application spaces. So I guess this is the short-term challenge, prove that it works and that you can reliably produce at scale. That's a short-term key challenge. And also at cost, and then midterm is still pushing the boundaries. That's how I would look at the key two challenges on a different timescale.
As I mentioned, we do have an entire session devoted to reproducibility, which gets exactly at those issues of repeatability that have, of course, both reliability but also cost implications. Markus Simon, how do you see it?
Yeah, we see as McKinsey basically two big challenges, and it's very much reflected also in the answers here. One is really the break-even point. Yeah, so we clearly see still a lot of room for improvement on that side. I mean, for industries like aviation, defense, there we have rather smaller volumes. It's clearly there. The break-even point is there, and we clearly see the applications. If you look into industries like automotive, where you have much higher volumes, where you need a reliable base and a clear break-even point, we are still, I would say, even far away from having it scalable in application. And the second point we really see is the whole topic about, you mentioned it already, Markus, about repeatability, reliability. I would call it also the whole production system, yeah, basically making it stable, making sure that also number 500 of the part, number 1,000, number 2,000 of the part has the same reliable quality as the first one had, knowing that each part has a very individual production process which you have to certify, you have to get the data in the systems, you have to make sure that after 2 years you can still analyze what happened and how the part was produced and what a defect error might be. So all this kind of getting this process stable over years, there is still a lot of room for improvement. So these are the 2 points we basically see. So I would fully tend to agree to the result of the group.
Francisco Betti, what's your take on this? The WEF, of course, has done a number of white papers that also get at some of these issues. So.
Well, I would say that it's interesting to see how reducing production cost and lack of business models add up to 61% of the total answer. So I do believe that there's a clear question around the value creation. So it's not only the technology and the level of readiness, but how do we apply that technology and how do we focus on the next generation's applications that need to be developed for the technology to be deployed at scale. What we have observed is that probably we can group the challenges in 3 main categories. I mean, building on what my colleagues just shared, I think that the level of readiness of the technology, but also the integration of new materials, new processes into existing production systems, that's clearly a challenge. But I'm quite confident. If you look at the pace at which technology is evolving, I'm quite confident on that front. Still a long way to go, but there is good progress. The second one that is not listed here is probably the organizational type of challenges. We simply don't have enough people who is well trained on additive manufacturing processes, skills and capabilities. So that's another area where companies and the community probably needs to focus on. And then the third one, I think it's the one related to the broader business ecosystem. We are still focusing on the replacements of specific components that could be 3D printing into a specific process or a broader products. But we are not taking a step back to rethink an entire value chain from the design to the production, assembly, and all the way to delivery. I think that that's another area where we as a community could look at the question in a different way.
Mm-hmm. Out of the box thinking, yeah. Thank you very much. Cindy Ko?
I agree with all what my fellow panelists have shared. I thought I would add on from an economic development point of view, how companies can actually further internationalize their capabilities. So I think I want to talk about the lack of norms and standards, right? And that's what Singapore has been proactively working on, really working with the TICs, or testing, inspection, and certification companies, developing standards. But more importantly, actually proactively participating with the international standards associations. So for example, ASTM International has a Center of Excellence in Singapore for Asia Pacific region, coordinating standards development projects. And Singapore alone has contributed 6 work items to the international community, right? Looking at standards beyond in the application of aerospace and automotive. I think, when there is a lot more clarity in terms of standards, if the international associations can work towards mutual recognition, that will actually lower the barriers for OEMs as well as service bureaus in internationalizing their capabilities.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Jörg Spindler?
Okay, about the costs, of course, you have to talk about the costs, and these are the main thing. If you compare a normal part and want to do it with a new process, but even if you work on the cost, you will never reach numbers like millions of cars by doing it with additive manufacturing processes. So we can work on costs, we can go with the break-even point more to the right side, to hundreds or thousands or few thousands, but you never will reach the automobile industry. That's my opinion. The second part, technology has to be stable. Of course it has, but I think there are some solutions. For example, MTU did it very good. And I think the main thing is the third topic. It was mentioned from Mr. Professor Süß a few 2 hours ago. He said you have to think about the fourth dimension. I think that's the real thing. If you have an attitude in the part, you can't do another way of production. For example, an electric feature or a cooling system inside, then that's a reason to do it with this new technology. And that's a reason to look at this technology, to bring speed in, bring this technology to a new stable status. That's the way we have to go. So costs are very important, but it will not be able to replace other production technologies.
Thank you very much. I have some great audience questions coming in, so I'm going to take one that has gotten a lot of likes from other members of the audience, and it's this, and I think I'm going to start out by giving it to Markus Simon, and if somebody else wants to weigh in, then feel free. If we look at 2D printing, there also were thousands of small companies that provided their own systems, including lasers, etc. Now we're left with around 10 competitors because of M&A in 2D printing. Will this happen in 3D printing as well? And if so, when?
It's a quite interesting question, yeah. So we were discussing already this morning in a smaller group. So what you see currently, especially also, I would say fired a bit by COVID, is quite a lot of M&A activity currently in this space. So there is a trend for sure for consolidation. And I mean, the 100 largest players currently in the market will for sure not be the 100 largest players in the next 5 years. On the other side, what we see quite a lot is new players coming in the market. I mean, the growth, the overall growth in the market is very much driven especially by new players and new technologies. So I would currently tend to see a shift from, well, first of all, we have a consolidation probably on the more established technologies, But I still see quite some room for new players in the market, with probably in a much, much later consolidation phase, with new technologies which enter the market.
Francisco, Betti, do you want to weigh in on that as well?
It was interesting because over the past 2 years, a good number of companies of additive manufacturing OEMs went public in the US. And I think that one of the reasons of why that happened is because we will most likely start seeing, more acquisitions and mergers, coming on board. I mean, we heard about Desktop Metal and X1, but also a few other examples there. I agree with, absolutely, I agree with your statement. I think that we will see more consolidation in the coming years as we saw in the 2D space. That's the trend.
Thank you very much. Here's another one that's gotten a lot of likes. My question to Dr. Seibold is, what % of CapEx and R&D does Siemens Energy spend on additive manufacturing? And if that's not something you can disclose, maybe you could compare the spend in AM to more traditional manufacturing, e.g. castings, forgings, machining.
So as the person who asked the question already eventually supposed exact figures, of course we can't disclose, but actually what I can share, we at Siemens Energy, we've defined top-down company core technologies, and there's 9 of them, and additive manufacturing is our single biggest R&D investment when it comes to driving a manufacturing technology forward. And we are spending a good number, double-digit euro million number on additive manufacturing per year on the R&D side. And as I said, it's our single biggest R&D investment on a particular technology that is not a specific product or application. And I guess also the fact that one of our board members, Jochen Eickholt, is participating at such a conference here also gives a bit credibility to the importance of this technology for us. The second question, CapEx, I guess you can eventually measure that a bit in number of printers. Jochen Eickholt mentioned that we have 90 different systems installed across Siemens Energy, and I guess there is, of course, also rather engineering-specific desktop printers in there to very quickly produce design prototypes, but I guess we have more than 50 big powder bed fusion systems now installed in our centers. And I guess also it's not a means by itself, but the fact that the number 50, I guess, is what makes most likely us one of the bigger or the biggest users when it comes to the technology. And I guess where we see this go is that this huge investment on the R&D side and CapEx side together for us is a strategic purpose choice, because we believe that if you want to move fast, and I guess as Mr. Spindler said from Audi, if you want to move fast, it's about design, material, and manufacturing. Those 3 things need to come together, and this is why we currently are pursuing this very strong vertical integration strategy. What we will most likely see over the next years is that many big users will complement the internal focus with a stronger external partnership approach, because it just is simply too expensive over the time to scale up then based all on your own investments. So I guess what we will do and what others will do, you will see hopefully a lot more ecosystem models, supply chain models, platform-based business models, which will drive the further adoption without needing to invest all your own money into CapEx. Yeah?
That gets, in a sense, at a question that another member of the audience is posing here, and it's this, and I'm going to put it to you, Jörg Spindler, because it relates to an additional question I'd also like to tie together with this. Why should AM make parts that are already available now, in other words, by conventional technologies, when being able to produce something that is not possible with classical technologies, then the cost would not be such an issue, right? Asks this person.
That's right. In the total life of the part, it has to be a positive business case, of course. Yeah, or you have to add value to the customer who is willing this feature in the product. Then the cost is not that focused. So you have to differentiate if you have an attitude in a part which you can't do in another way. Is it worth to pay the money or not? And do you need this to reach a higher level of your product? Yeah.
And here's the question that in some ways is related to that. How would you use 3D printing to integrate multiple functions into structures? For example, using batteries as the structure itself.
At the moment, we do it in the tooling for big tools for other processes. For example, the casting process or the hot forming process, where you can't reach results you can reach with the additive manufacturing process. For example, the cooling near the surface of the tool itself. So the process in the production of casting parts is much faster, and the money you spend at the beginning to produce the tool, you will get back, and you will get back more in the process by producing the casting parts. For example, or you reach possibilities for the crash which are much better in the hot forming process, you can't reach without this technology.
Does anybody else want to address that last question of integrating multiple functions? It's gotten a lot of likes.
I guess what I see, and you said this as well, is, and I guess Markus said this also with the break-even point, I also think that, and it's already happening, but I think it needs to be emphasized, you need to, in order to generate more applications, move away from this pure and only part-by-part comparison, additive versus a conventional part. You need to think in, I guess it's the question around business model and value add, and I think this is then, what is your value driver? And I think there is value drivers where additive has a lot of benefit already today. It's faster production times, you can reduce inventories. You can, of course, expand the functionality of a part and then of a component and of a subsystem. The challenge that I think, and I guess you said this, Francisco, this term is your second of your three challenges, the organizational boundaries. A challenge that I think we face and others face is our return on investment calculations focus a lot on the part-by-part comparison. And if you generate lead time reductions and inventory savings, for the company's cash flow, they are very beneficial. We just don't know how to account for them. And when you then ask for investment, and you fill in your classical Excel format in order to compare R&D investments, then we sometimes don't have processes that allow that. So I guess that's a challenge where I would like to bring these two topics together. We need to shift away from the part-by-part comparison to the value that additive can bring as part of a system. And then we need to find ways how our organizations can actually account for this return on investment on a more holistic basis than the individual component basis.
Very briefly, if you would, Jörg. Yeah, sure.
Please let me add something. This fourth dimension mentioned from Professor Süß could also be speed in the development, in the R&D process. If you're much faster, you can try different cases, different shapes of parts, and this is also a kind of fourth dimension. So for the development, it's elementary.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Roland, a couple of questions have come in relation to metals. First one is, what's your take on using additive manufacturing for rare earth minerals like neodymium, NdFeH magnets? Sorry, I'm a layperson.
No, I'm not an expert on those materials here. No, but I know the topic. To which extent rare earth application or rare earth applications can be substituted by other elements, right? And we do have a small team even working on questions like that. Here you have to dig deep into the physics really to understand what's the challenge there. But I don't see it as in relation to the additive technology. This is something different. This is a material development, to which extent new compositions can be defined, designed to come close to those specific questions.
Very interesting. Thank you. Also, a second question on metal. It goes to printers, but let me get your point of view on this. What would be the first thing that you would do to improve the current metal printers in order to get a higher level of satisfaction?
Printers. I'm still impressed, by this material handling challenge, which is obvious. And you just have to enter a production site, and it's obvious. Visually, you can see it. I think here we have to really come to complete different solutions in order to come closer to this cost and efficiency challenges. The materials itself, I think, are, as of today, accepted. There are modifications required which are solved, the questions which are solved, but we are not talking about complete new ones. What we see is a shift from steel and nickel-based alloys. Copper is something, and we saw it yesterday in the evening in the startup night. New materials are coming up out of this new application fields, right? And here we are really trying to get our arms around as Oerlikon, as a company, also to serve those demands.
Thank you. Anybody else want to weigh in on the printers and what would be the main thing you'd want to improve?
I guess it's eventually not so much the particular individual things. There is still a lot to be improved, but also, to be honest, we've also come quite a bit. Yeah, I guess that today's technology that allows us to realize components that were unthinkable 3, 4, 5 years ago. So the technology has come a far bit. Instead of talking about particular technology elements, I think what I would like to see more from the equipment suppliers is a clear focus on OEE, of looking at these printers as a machine tool, and not so much only as a differentiation through the technology itself. 4 printers, 4 lasers, 6 lasers, 12 lasers, bigger build chamber. It's all facts that you can address. But I'd like to see a stronger and bigger focus on OEE, overall equipment efficiency, and what drives it, and how do you focus on those elements to make the machines more stable. I think that's, for me, the next step that the industry overall needs from the printer side, apart from still pushing the limits of the technology, of course.
And Cindy, I have a question with a lot of likes that's actually, it's not exactly Singapore, but it is a question about another big Asian player. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to put this one to you. How can emerging countries like India play a strategic role in advancing AM?
That's a tough question. I thought that, the additive manufacturing industry, I think they acknowledge there are 3 key challenges when it comes to driving adoption and innovation. One is the lack of, there's a global lack of talent in additive manufacturing. Number 2 is that some technology roadblocks, or rather bottlenecks, are not roadblocks. We spoke about the reliability and the yield of equipment, and the lack of standards and norms. I think then from a government's perspective, I shared quite a bit about what Singapore has been doing, that India could actually, 1, invest in R&D. Number 2, that is developing global additive manufacturing talent, at least in supporting its own industry. Number 3, the need to really work in very close partnership with the TIC players and standards bodies, and really creating that ecosystem. I think Singapore, we had the advantage of being a very small country. We are a city, state, and country. So there's a very dense ecosystem, right? For India, it's a much larger geographical footprint. Then I think there lies a challenge about coordinating its efforts to actually accelerate the AM adoption and innovation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Francisco, would you like to also perhaps weigh in on that? And I'm going to tie that to another question because we're just about out of time now. Well, actually do that one first and then I'll bring in the other one because it's quite a different subject.
Maybe I will connect that with the value conversation we were having before. I think that additive is an amazing horizontal enabler. We need to look now at the vertical value proposition, value add equation for each sector, but also for each geography. The solutions that may work in Singapore may not work in India and vice versa, right? So there is some tailoring that has to happen, and that's what we need to probably unpack next. And talking about value, maybe an important thought is that we are only focusing right now on value when it comes to efficiency, OEE, you mentioned before, productivity, profitability, and the ROI. But we are not talking about other dimensions that can be extremely important. Think about sustainability. We are not looking at how additive can contribute to meeting the new challenges and targets. Think about how additive may help create a safer environment and change the worker experience. We're in a sector in which attracting talent is an issue today. So I would like maybe to leave you with that thought on the value equation that has to go beyond productivity and ROI, in my view.
Okay, two last questions, but with the request for super short answers. First one, again, would be for you, perhaps, Francisco. Most manufacturing companies still have no experience with additive. How could they be supported in adoption?
Well, I think that we need, it goes back to the point that Michael, Professor Seuss was mentioning this morning. We do need an ecosystem, and that's why conferences such as AMTC are extremely important. We do need to create that connection in between the manufacturing OEMs, the technology providers, so that we can start piloting, exploring new solutions. There's a lot of advocacy and education that has to be done yet.
And Markus Simon, my remaining most liked question is this. Perhaps you can just briefly address it if you would. In what areas of basic R&D is there the greatest need for investment and participation?
I mean, there is still a lot to do on the technology side. I would currently rather see the biggest area really in getting the industrialized production system reliable, as I mentioned it, because there I still see a lot of doubts. If you talk to larger players who want to use additive manufacturing on a larger scale, it's very much about how reliable is it, how can I make sure that the part number 1000 is still working and not just the first parts, how do I make the whole quality system, the certification round. I would rather tend to say there you should invest currently a lot. And yeah, of course, there's still a lot to do on basic R&D for sure.
Anybody else want to add an absolute top priority for R&D investment? Not getting any volunteers? Roland, you were looking pensive?
No, I think a lot of the topics have been already here mentioned. Investment, going back to the question, investment involving those companies which are not yet engaged in it. I think this is one element to broaden the base. On the other hand side, those which are in have to, find a way to overcome. Now I pinch you 2 minutes or 1 minute. An upcoming intrinsic problem challenge which nobody, well, hardly anybody is aware actually. On the one hand side, we do have a complete open technology question. Is it a powder bed technology as of today? Is it binder jetting technology? Is it something else on the one hand side? On the other hand side, we are pushing as hard as we can to go for industrialization. That means qualification, acceptance tests, stuff like that. That means this, and it was somehow discussed this morning in the first panel, things are fixed. Things are somehow defined on the one hand side, and that applies to technologies which are very mature, whether it's grinding, milling, or whatever. But for our technology, in terms of additive, it doesn't work. And this is something what we sense, what will come up, and we do not yet have a solution here. I think these are questions which maybe we might discuss next year.
Indeed. Lots to think about for the remainder of this day and also looking toward AMTC 2022. Thank you so much for, in fact, so ably setting up the rest of our discussions today with this look at where we stand and where we're going and priorities for both. So let's give them a warm round of applause, please. You can just stay with us for a moment. No, you can stay with us for 1 moment because, in fact, we are now going to take a break, ladies and gentlemen. I just want to give you some quick thoughts about what we can do for the next 3/4 of an hour. Live participants can do a bit of networking or join the breakout sessions. If you're joining us online, you can also choose from a couple of great breakout topics: an international discussion on coordination of AM initiatives, which we, of course, just been talking about here, or you can hear more about the WEF, the World Economic Forum's outlook, in a session presenting key findings from its position paper on AM. And here's how to get to the breakout sessions if you are with us here live. International coordination is in room Brussels. That's here on the ground floor. And the WEF session is in room K1 and K2 on the first floor. So enjoy the break and the breakout sessions, and I look forward to seeing everybody back here in 45 minutes for a deeper dive on AM in the automotive industry. And we will be presenting our first blueprint case there, so don't miss it. See you then. Thank you.